My name is Harper Williams, and at 34 I never thought I'd become homeless and jobless in the same week. But when my sister Vanessa announced over family dinner that she was moving into my house, the one our grandmother left me, I smiled because she didn't know I'd sold it yesterday. Nobody knew what was coming, especially Vanessa. Hey there, amazing viewers! Before I dive into how my entire family dynamic imploded, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family revenge drama already has you intrigued, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma eventually served my sister the coldest dish possible. I still remember the day Grandma Elaine passed away 3 years ago. The matriarch of our family had always been the glue that held us together. Her sprawling Victorian house in Providence, the setting for our holiday gatherings and Sunday dinners for as long as I could remember. Her passing hit all of us hard, but perhaps me most of all. While growing up, I'd spent countless weekends with her learning to bake her famous apple pie and listening to stories about her youth, while my parents worked overtime and my sister Vanessa pursued her social life. The reading of the will was a somber affair held in Grandma's living room where the scent of her favorite lavender candles still lingered. Our family gathered: my parents Robert and Claire, my sister Vanessa, our cousins from Boston, and a few distant relatives who'd made the journey. I sat quietly in the corner, still processing my grief, when Mr. Thornton, Grandma's attorney of 30 years, cleared his throat and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. To my beloved granddaughter Harper, he read, his voice steady, who has shown me true companionship and care in my final years. I leave my home and all its contents with the hope that she will fill it with the same love and warmth that I tried to provide. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt all eyes turn toward me, some with genuine happiness, others like Vanessa's, with barely concealed shock and resentment. My sister's perfectly manicured nails dug into the arm of her chair, her smile not reaching her eyes as she congratulated me with a tight hug afterward. "You must be so surprised," she whispered in my ear, her voice honey-sweet but laced with something darker. "I mean, you barely have a stable career. What will you do with a house this size?" I stepped back, studying her face. At 32, Vanessa had always been the successful one-corporate job designer wardrobe and a carefully curated social media presence that showcased her seemingly perfect life. What most people didn't see was how little time she'd spent with Grandma, always having an excuse to miss the weekly visits that I'd maintained faithfully. My parents approached next, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders. "Your grandmother always had her reasons," Dad said, squeezing my arm affectionately. "She knew what she was doing." Mom smiled, though I caught a flicker of something concern perhaps in her eyes. "It's a big responsibility, honey. If you need help managing it, I'll be fine," I assured her, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. My job as a freelance graphic designer was steady, but not exactly lucrative. The property taxes alone would stretch my budget thin. In the weeks that followed, I moved into Grandma's house, my house now, and tried to adjust to the new reality. I converted the sunroom into a home office, kept Grandma's bedroom intact as a sort of memorial, and slowly began to make the place my own. Vanessa didn't visit once during that time, though she called occasionally to ask if I was managing okay, in a tone that suggested she expected me to be failing. I wasn't failing, though. For the first time in my life, I had a place that was truly mine. I started hosting small dinner parties for friends, planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, just as Grandma had taught me, and even adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Rusty, who quickly became my shadow. My freelance business began to grow as I dedicated more time to it, no longer wasting money on rent. But beneath the surface of my new life, I could feel the undercurrents of family tension. At holiday gatherings, Vanessa would make subtle comments about the house, how certain renovations were desperately needed, or how she would have done so much more with the place. My parents, ever the peacekeepers, would quickly change the subject. I tried to maintain the peace as well, inviting Vanessa over for coffee, asking about her life and work, attempting to bridge the growing gap between us. Sometimes she'd accept arriving with a bottle of wine and tales of her latest promotion or vacation, her eyes constantly scanning the house as though mentally redecorating. Other times, she'd cancel at the last minute, citing work emergencies that seemed suspiciously frequent. It was during one of these rare visits, almost 2 years after I'd inherited the house, that Vanessa first mentioned her relationship troubles. "Trevor and I are taking a break," she announced, swirling her wine glass as we sat on the porch swing. "His company is downsizing, and he's been impossible to be around lately." I expressed my sympathy, though I'd never particularly warmed to Trevor with his condescending attitude and habit of interrupting Vanessa when she spoke. "You're lucky, you know," she continued, her gaze drifting over the garden I'd worked so hard to restore. "No relationship drama, no mortgage, just freedom." The way she said it made it sound like I'd cheated somehow, like I hadn't earned what I had. I bit back a retort about how I'd been the one visiting Grandma every weekend for years, how I'd been the one helping her sort through medications and driving her to doctor appointments, while Vanessa was too busy climbing the corporate ladder. Instead, I refilled her glass and changed the subject, unaware that this conversation was the first rumble of an approaching storm that would soon engulf our entire family. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came 6 months ago. I had just finished a major project for a new client, a rebrand for a local chain of organic cafes that had the potential to lead to more substantial corporate work. I was celebrating with a glass of wine in the garden when my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Harper, sweetie, I was wondering if you could come over for dinner this weekend. There's something your father and I need to discuss with you." A knot formed in my stomach. "Is everything okay? Is it Dad's health?" No, nothing like that," she assured me quickly. "It's just family matters. Vanessa will be there too." That didn't ease my concern. Family dinners with all 4 of us had become increasingly rare and awkward affairs. When Sunday arrived, I pulled into my parents' driveway with a sense of foreboding. Vanessa's sleek silver BMW was already there, parked at a slight angle as though she'd been in a hurry. Inside, the atmosphere was strained. Mom kept disappearing into the kitchen, under the pretense of checking on dinner, while Dad seemed unusually interested in a golf tournament on TV. Vanessa sat scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my arrival with a distracted "hey." It wasn't until we were seated around the dining table, Mom's pot roast steaming in the center, that the reason for the gathering became clear. "Girls," Dad began, setting down his fork. "Your mother and I have made a decision. We're selling the house and moving to Florida." I nearly choked on my water. My parents had lived in the same modest colonial in suburban Rhode Island for over 35 years. "What brought this on?" I asked, glancing between them. Mom reached for Dad's hand. "Your father's company offered an early retirement package, and we've been talking about downsizing for years. A nice little condo in Naples, no more snow to shovel, no more property taxes. Plus," Dad added, "we could use some of the money to help out with." He stopped abruptly as Mom squeezed his hand. "Help out with what?" I prompted. Vanessa cleared her throat. "Mom and Dad are helping me with a down payment on a place," she announced, a triumphant edge to her voice. "After the breakup with Trevor, and with the company restructuring, I could use a fresh start." I stared at her, then at my parents, who suddenly seemed very interested in their pot roast. "That's great," I managed, though my mind was racing. My sister, who made easily twice my salary, was getting financial help while I had been left to figure out the considerable expenses of maintaining a century-old house on my own. "We'd help you too," Harper, Mom said, quickly reading my expression. "But you already have the house and I don't need help," I interrupted more sharply than intended. "I'm doing fine." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of strained conversation and awkward silences. As I was leaving, Vanessa caught up to me in the driveway. "Don't be upset with Mom and Dad," she said, her tone condescending. They're just trying to be fair. You got Grandma's house after all. I took a deep breath. It's not about the money, Vanessa. It's about the fact that you never even visited Grandma when she was sick, and now you're acting entitled to. Oh, here we go again with the dutiful granddaughter routine. She cut me off, rolling her eyes. You know what I have, my own life, my own problems. I can't help it if Grandma played favorites. She didn't play favorites, I snapped. She recognized who actually cared about her, versus who just showed up when they needed something. Vanessa's face hardened. Whatever helps you sleep at night in that big empty house of yours. As I drove home that night, her words echoed in my mind. The house did feel empty sometimes despite Rusty's companionship and my occasional dinner guests. But it was mine, the one thing I had that Vanessa couldn't take or diminish with her cutting remarks. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Mr. Thornton, Grandma's attorney. His usually composed voice sounded troubled. Miss Williams, I'm calling because there's been an inquiry about your grandmother's will. Specifically the house. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of inquiry? Your sister has approached me, asking if there were any conditions attached to your inheritance. She mentioned something about your grandmother having discussed the possibility of the property remaining in the family long term. Ice formed in my stomach. And was there any condition I need? No, he said firmly. Your grandmother left the house to you unconditionally, but I thought you should know about the inquiry. After thanking him, I sat in my grandmother's old rocking chair trying to process this information. Why would Vanessa be asking about conditions on the will? Was she looking for a loophole, some way to challenge my ownership? My suspicions were confirmed the very next day when my parents called. This time it was my father who sounded uncomfortable. Harper, honey, your sister mentioned she's been having some financial difficulties lately. The condo she was looking at fell through, and with the job market being what it is. My heart sank as I realized where this was heading. She was wondering, he continued hesitantly, if you might consider letting her stay at the house for a while, just until she gets back on her feet. Dad, I said slowly, Vanessa makes 6 figures. How is she having financial difficulties? There was a pause. Investments that didn't pan out, he finally replied. And she's been supporting Trevor more than she let on. I closed my eyes, feeling a headache building. I need to think about this. But before I could properly consider the request, the situation escalated. 2 days later, I arrived home to find Vanessa's car in my driveway. She was sitting on the porch steps, Rusty cautiously sniffing at her designer boots. We need to talk, she said, standing up. Her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes ringed with faint shadows. I led her inside, an uneasy feeling settling over me. We sat in the kitchen, where Grandma had taught me to make her famous apple pie, the late afternoon sun, streaming through the stained glass window she'd installed decades ago. Trevor left, Vanessa announced without preamble. Cleaned out our joint account too. And I've been put on notice at work, they're eliminating my entire department. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Despite our differences, she was still my sister. I need a place to stay, she continued. Just for a few months while I figure things out. I hesitated. The house had 4 bedrooms, plenty of space. But something in her tone, entitled rather than requesting, raised my hackles. Have you considered a smaller apartment, or staying with Mom and Dad until they move? She scoffed. They've already started packing. And I can't afford even a decent studio right now, not with my credit card debt. Which you accumulated. How exactly? I couldn't help asking. Last I checked, you were posting Instagram photos from the Amalfi Coast 2 months ago. Her eyes narrowed. Not all of us want to live like hermits, Harper. Some of us have social lives, professional images to maintain. Right, I said flatly. Well, I'll think about it and let you know. But as she was leaving, she turned back with an expression I'd never seen before, calculating, almost predatory. You know, I've been thinking a lot about Grandma lately, she said. About how strange it was that she left everything to you when I was the one named after her side of the family. Vanessa, Elaine, after her and her mother. I stared at her, uncomprehending. Dad mentioned that there might have been an earlier will, she continued. One where the house was meant to be shared. Wouldn't that be interesting to look into? With that parting shot she left, leaving me standing in the doorway with a growing sense of dread. There had never been another will, I was certain of it. But the threat was clear. Vanessa was prepared to create family discord, perhaps even legal trouble, to get what she wanted. That night, I could barely sleep. The house that had been my sanctuary, my inheritance from the woman who had loved and understood me best, suddenly felt precarious. And as the first light of dawn filtered through my curtains, I made a decision that would change everything. The morning after Vanessa's thinly veiled threat, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, a pot of coffee, and a determination I'd rarely felt before. Rusty lay at my feet, occasionally nudging my ankle as if sensing my distress. I needed a plan not just to protect myself, but to finally address the years of manipulation and entitlement that had defined my relationship with my sister. My first call was to Mr. Thornton. The elderly lawyer listened patiently as I explained the situation, his occasional, and I see the only indicators of his reaction. Miss Williams, he said, when I finished, I want to be absolutely clear. Your grandmother's will was properly executed and witnessed. There is no previous will on file. The house is yours to do with as you please. And if Vanessa tries to contest it, his sigh carried the weight of decades of family legal disputes. She could try, but without evidence of incompetence or undue influence, she would almost certainly fail. However, such proceedings can be emotionally draining and financially costly. After thanking him, I made my second call to Diane Mercer, a real estate agent, whose card I'd kept after meeting her at a neighborhood block party. I needed to know my options, including the nuclear one, selling the house entirely. Diane arrived that afternoon, her brisk efficiency a balm to my frayed nerves. She walked through the house, making notes and asking questions about renovations and the age of various systems. It's a beautiful property, Harper, she said as we sat down to discuss her assessment. The market in this area is hot right now, especially for historic homes with character. If you decided to sell, we could list it significantly above what similar-sized modern homes are going for. The figure she named made my eyes widen. It was substantially more than I'd imagined, enough to buy a smaller place outright and still have a considerable sum left over. Of course, Diane continued, there's also the option of renting it out, either the whole house or by room. The monthly income could be significant, especially given the proximity to downtown and the university. I nodded, my mind racing. How quickly could it sell if I decided to go that route? With proper staging and marketing, given the character, location, and current demand, I'd say we could have serious offers within a couple of weeks. After she left, I spent hours researching housing options in the area, from condos to smaller historic homes in up-and-coming neighborhoods. I created spreadsheets comparing costs and benefits, ran calculations on potential mortgage payments versus the lump sum from selling Grandma's house. By midnight, I had the outlines of a plan, but something was still missing. The next morning brought clarity in the form of an email from a past client, the owner of those organic cafes I'd rebranded. She was expanding to Seattle and wanted me to handle the marketing for the new locations. The project would require relocation for at least 6 months, with the potential for ongoing work if things went well. It was as if the universe was offering me an escape hatch. I could sell the house, move across the country for this project, and start fresh, without the weight of family expectations and Vanessa's schemes hanging over me. But as tempting as escape was, it felt like surrender. Grandma hadn't raised me to run from problems. No, I needed something more satisfying, a plan that would not only protect me but would teach Vanessa the lesson she'd needed to learn for years. I spent the next week in a flurry of activity. I met with Diane again to discuss listing the house, consulted with a financial advisor about investing the proceeds, and had lunch with my parents to casually inquire about their moving timeline and Vanessa's ongoing situation. "She's really struggling," Harper Mom said, concern etching lines around her eyes. The severance package wasn't what she expected, and the job market in her field is competitive. Dad nodded somberly. "We've helped as much as we can, but with our retirement plans." "I understand," I said, patting Mom's hand. "Actually, I've been thinking about Vanessa staying at the house." Their faces lit up with relief, and I felt a twinge of guilt for what I was about to set in motion. But I reminded myself of Vanessa's threat, of her years of dismissing my achievements and belittling my choices. "Why don't we plan a family dinner next Friday?" I suggested. "At the house, we can discuss the arrangements then." As they readily agreed, I carefully omitted mentioning the meeting I had scheduled with Diane and a prospective buyer the very next day. The buyer was a young surgeon relocating to the area, eager, financially solid, and most importantly, willing to close quickly and offer above asking price in exchange for minimal contingencies. By Thursday afternoon, we had a signed contract with closing scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing for what would be the last family dinner in my grandmother's house. I cleaned, meticulously prepared Grandma's recipes, and even set the table with her best china. On the surface, it appeared I was welcoming Vanessa with open arms. In reality, I was setting the stage for a reckoning. Monday morning brought one final piece of my plan into place. I signed a lease on a charming cottage in a historic district across town, smaller than Grandma's house, but with a fenced yard for Rusty and a perfect space for my home office. I arranged for a moving company to pack and transport my essential belongings immediately after closing, with the bulk to follow once I returned from my Seattle project. By Friday evening, as I put the finishing touches on dinner, everything was in place. The house was sold, my new place secured, and my future mapped out, all without Vanessa or my parents suspecting a thing. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:30. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and went to welcome my family to what would be an unforgettable evening. The scene was set perfectly, Grandma's dining room glowing with candlelight, her antique china gleaming on the crisp white tablecloth, and the aroma of her famous pot roast filling the air. My parents arrived first, bearing a bottle of wine and warm hugs. My father's eyes crinkled with pride as he surveyed the table. "Your grandmother would be so pleased," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "She always wanted this house to be full of family." I swallowed the lump in my throat, reminding myself why I'd set this plan in motion. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. Vanessa had arrived. She swept in wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, carrying a small, expensive-looking gift bag. Her smile seemed genuinely warm for once, though her eyes darted around the foyer assessing. "The place looks nice," she offered, handing me the bag. "A little housewarming gift. Or should I say, house sharing." Inside was a scented candle from a boutique brand she knew I loved but rarely splurged on. The gesture, so uncharacteristically thoughtful, momentarily shook my resolve. Then I remembered her threat about contesting Grandma's will, and my determination returned. We moved to the dining room, where Mom immediately began asking about the Seattle project I'd mentioned during our lunch. I explained the opportunity while serving the appetizers, Grandma's stuffed mushrooms, a family favorite. "Seattle," Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "But I thought," she trailed off, glancing at our parents. "It's just for 6 months, I clarified, meeting her gaze steadily. "Maybe a bit longer if things go well." "But what about the house?" Mom asked, confusion evident in her voice. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss tonight," I replied carefully, setting down my fork. "Vanessa mentioned needing a place to stay while she gets back on her feet." My sister's expression shifted to one of triumph, poorly disguised as gratitude. "That's so generous of you, Harper. I promise it won't be for long. Dad raised his wine glass. This is what family is for, supporting each other through rough patches. I took a deep breath. Actually, there's something else you should know. The moment had arrived sooner than I'd planned, but there was no turning back now. I've decided to accept a full-time position with Evergreen Organics. They're expanding rapidly, and they want me to head their creative department. But that would mean moving to Seattle permanently, Mom said slowly. I nodded. The opportunity is too good to pass up. Better pay benefits, creative control, everything I've been working toward. What about the house? Vanessa asked, her voice tight. Well, that's the thing, I said, meeting her eyes directly. With me relocating and the costs of maintaining this place, I've had to make a decision. I've sold it. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's fork clattered against his plate. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. And Vanessa, her face drained of color, then flushed with anger so quickly it was alarming. You what? She finally managed, her voice dangerously quiet. I sold the house, I repeated calmly. The closing is next Tuesday. You can't do that. Vanessa exploded, rising from her chair. This is our grandmother's house, a family legacy. It's my house, I corrected her gently. Left to me with no conditions. I've consulted with Mr. Thornton to confirm. But you knew I needed a place to stay. You invited us here to discuss arrangements. I invited you here to inform you of my decision, I clarified, and to offer an alternative. My parents sat in stunned silence, glancing between us like spectators at a tennis match. What alternative? Vanessa demanded, still standing. I've arranged to cover the security deposit and first 2 months' rent on an apartment near your office. It's not as spacious as this place, obviously, but it's in a good neighborhood and within your budget once you're back on your feet. Her laugh was brittle, so generous. A consolation prize after you've sold off a historic family home without even consulting any of us. Consulting you wasn't required, I said, my voice hardening slightly. But if we're talking about family consideration, when was the last time you consulted me before making major life decisions, or before approaching Mr. Thornton to ask about contesting Grandma's will? Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. He told you about that, of course he did. He was Grandma's attorney for 3 decades. He knew exactly what she wanted and why. My father finally found his voice. Vanessa, you tried to contest the will. Without talking to us, she waved dismissively. I was just exploring options. Harper clearly doesn't appreciate what she was given if she's willing to sell it to strangers. What I appreciate, I said evenly, is that Grandma trusted me to make my own decisions. She knew I would honor her memory whether I kept the house or not. My mother, always the peacemaker, reached for both our hands across the table. Girls, please. This is still a family dinner. Harper has made her decision, and while it's unexpected, it's her right. Exactly, Vanessa snapped, jerking her hand away. Harper always does exactly what she wants, consequences be damned. Just like when she abandoned her stable job to freelance, leaving me to explain to everyone why my sister was essentially unemployed. I was never unemployed, I corrected. I was building my own business. Successfully, I might add, given that I'm now being offered a director-level position. After how many years of scraping by? Meanwhile, I've been supporting Mom and Dad, contributing to their retirement fund, maintaining the family's reputation. Supporting them, I echoed incredulously. They're helping you buy a condo. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. That arrangement has changed, given recent circumstances. The implications hung in the air. My parents' assistance had been redirected to help Vanessa through her current crisis, a crisis she downplayed to me while painting herself as the responsible daughter to them. I stood and began clearing the barely touched dinner plates. I think we could all use a moment to process. There's apple pie for dessert, Grandma's recipe. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, hands shaking slightly as I cut perfect slices of pie. The confrontation had gone both better and worse than I'd anticipated. The truth was out, but the weight of family disappointment, particularly my parents', was heavier than expected. Mom appeared in the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of concern and confusion. "Harper, sweetheart, is this really what you want?" To leave everything behind, I placed the pie server down carefully. "I'm not leaving everything, Mom. Just a house. The memories, the important things Grandma gave me, those come with me." She sighed. "Your sister is upset. You know how she gets when things don't go according to her plan." "That's exactly the problem," I said softly. "Vanessa believes everyone else's life should accommodate her plan, mine included." Before Mom could respond, Vanessa appeared behind her, eyes red, but spine rigid with anger. "The buyers," she demanded. "Who are they?" How much I considered deflecting but decided honesty was the cleanest path forward. I named the figure significantly higher than the house's appraised value due to the hot market and the property's unique charm. Vanessa's jaw dropped. "That's," she stopped, clearly recalculating. "I might be able to match that. With a loan, and if Mom and Dad, the contracts are signed," I interrupted firmly. "And frankly, even if they weren't, I wouldn't sell to you." "Why the hell not?" she demanded, color rising in her cheeks again. "Because you've never valued this place for what it is, Grandma's home full of her life and love. You've only seen it as something you should have gotten, something to possess because it's valuable." "That's not fair," she protested, though weakly. "Isn't it? You barely visited her when she was alive. You complained about the old person smell and how outdated everything was. Now suddenly it's a precious family legacy you can't bear to lose." Dad appeared in the doorway behind them, his expression grave. "I think we should call it a night. Clearly everyone needs time to process." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of stilted goodbyes and promises to talk again soon. As I closed the door behind my family, the house felt eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Rusty padded over and rested his head on my knee, offering silent comfort. "It's done, boy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "For better or worse, it's done." But as I prepared for bed that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "This isn't over. Family legacy isn't something you sell to the highest bidder. You'll regret this decision." I stared at the message for a long moment before switching off my phone without replying. The confrontation might be over, but the fallout was just beginning. "Hey everyone. Wow, can you believe what just happened at that family dinner? I'd love to know if you've ever had to stand your ground against family pressure like this. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. If you're enjoying this family drama roller coaster, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this. The tension is building, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when Vanessa realizes she can't manipulate her way into getting what she wants. The days following the disastrous family dinner passed in a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into preparations for both the house closing and my impending move to Seattle, using the practical tasks as a buffer against the emotional storm. My parents called daily, their messages a mixture of concern, confusion, and cautious support. I answered when I could, keeping conversations brief and focused on logistics rather than feelings. Vanessa, meanwhile, had launched a two-pronged offensive. The first came in the form of a formal letter from an attorney, not Mr. Thornton, but a sleek corporate lawyer whose letterhead screamed expensive, suggesting irregularities in Grandma's will, and requesting all documentation related to the house sale. It was clearly a delay tactic, an attempt to frighten the buyers into backing out before closing. The second prong was more insidious, a family-wide email campaign. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out, expressing concern about my decision to abandon the family home. An aunt from Boston called in tears, asking if I understood how much the house had meant to Grandma's siblings. Even my parents' closest friends sent carefully worded messages suggesting I reconsider. "It's amazing how interested everyone is now," I remarked to Rusty as we sat on the porch swing one evening. 3 years of barely a phone call and suddenly I'm depriving them all of their birthright. Mr. Thornton proved invaluable during this time, responding to the attorney's letter with firm legal clarity that left no room for further challenges. The will was ironclad, the sale legitimate, and any attempt to interfere would constitute actionable harassment. The corporate lawyer backed down quickly after that, though Vanessa's social campaign continued. The morning of the closing arrived crisp and clear, a perfect early autumn day. I'd spent the weekend packing my personal belongings, separating items with sentimental value from those I could leave behind. The buyers had agreed to purchase most of the furniture along with the house, which simplified my move considerably. As I prepared to leave for the attorney's office, a text from my father pinged, "Mom and I are proud of you, sweetheart. Doing what's right isn't always what's easy. Call us after it's done." The message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Despite the tension of recent days, my parents were trying in their way to support my decision while maintaining peace with Vanessa. It couldn't be easy for them, caught between their daughter's conflict. The closing itself was anticlimactic: signatures and handshakes, congratulations, and small talk. The buyer's Dr. Martin and his wife spoke enthusiastically about their plans for the space, preserving the historic elements, while updating systems, hosting family gatherings in the dining room where Grandma had presided over countless holidays. Hearing their vision, I felt a weight lifting. The house would be loved just as Grandma would have wanted. As I handed over the keys, Dr. Martin's wife squeezed my hand. "We'll take good care of it," she promised, seeming to understand the emotional significance beyond the transaction. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and took one last walk through the empty rooms before leaving. In each space memories surfaced: Grandma teaching me to knit in the window seat the Christmas I'd fallen asleep under the tree, waiting for Santa the afternoon we'd baked 6 pies for the neighborhood potluck. But these weren't memories of the house. I realized they were memories of Grandma herself, of love, and lessons that I carried within me. Outside, the moving company had arrived to transport my remaining belongings to the cottage I'd leased across town. With Rusty settled in the passenger seat of my car, I drove away from Grandma's house, no longer mine, feeling a complex mixture of sadness, relief, and anticipation. I spent that night in my new place, surrounded by boxes and the few pieces of furniture I'd brought with me: Grandma's rocking chair, her writing desk, and the quilt she'd made for my 16th birthday. It was smaller than what I'd left behind, but it already felt more like mine than the Grand Victorian ever had. The next morning I woke to a barrage of missed calls and texts. Vanessa had discovered the sale was complete. Her voicemail was a barely coherent mixture of accusations and threats, culminating in a promise that I would regret this betrayal for the rest of my life. I deleted it without responding, and turned my attention to finalizing details for my Seattle trip. 3 days later, as I was packing for my flight, an unexpected visitor arrived. My mother stood on the porch of my new cottage, a casserole dish in her hands, and uncertainty in her eyes. "I brought dinner," she said tentatively. "I thought you might be too busy packing to cook." I invited her in, giving her the abbreviated tour of my much smaller space. She nodded approvingly at the cozy living room, the efficient kitchen, the small garden visible through the back windows. "It suits you," she said, surprising me. "More than the big house did, if I'm being honest." We sat at my tiny dining table, the casserole steaming between us. Mom fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd observed throughout my childhood. "Your sister isn't speaking to us," she finally said. "She says we should have stopped you somehow." I sighed. "That's not fair to you and Dad." "No, it isn't," Mom agreed with unexpected firmness. "But then Vanessa has never been particularly fair when she doesn't get her way." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I should have intervened years ago when the competition between you two started. I thought it was normal sibling rivalry, but it became something unhealthy." The admission stunned me into silence. My mother had always been the peacekeeper, smoothing over conflicts without acknowledging their deeper causes. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Because I'm proud of you for making your own path, even when it was difficult. And because I want you to know that while we love both our daughters equally, we don't always approve of Vanessa's choices or methods." It wasn't a complete vindication, but it was more than I'd ever expected. We spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking about Grandma, about my new job, about the subtle family dynamics that had shaped our relationships for decades. When she left, our goodbye hug felt different, warmer, more honest. The next morning I boarded my flight to Seattle with a lighter heart than I'd felt in months. Seattle welcomed me with its characteristic misty rain and vibrant energy. The Evergreen Organics team proved to be everything I'd hoped for: creative, passionate, and appreciative of my vision for their expanding brand. I threw myself into the work, exploring the city on weekends, and video chatting with my parents regularly. Rusty stayed with them while I got settled, his presence helping to heal the rift that Vanessa's anger had created. As for my sister, she maintained radio silence. Her social media accounts, usually updated multiple times daily, went dormant. When I asked my parents about her during our calls, they offered vague reassurances that she was adjusting and figuring things out. I didn't press for details, grateful for the reprieve from conflict. 2 months into my Seattle adventure, the unexpected happened. I was working late at the office, finalizing designs for a new location, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. "Is this Harper Williams?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, speaking." "This is Diana Martin. My husband and I purchased your grandmother's house." My stomach dropped. Had something gone wrong? Was there an issue with the property I hadn't disclosed? "Of course, Mrs. Martin. What can I do for you?" "Please call me Diana. I'm calling because, well, this is a bit awkward. Someone has been hanging around the house." "A woman." "She told our neighbors she's family of the previous owner, just visiting to check on things." "Vanessa." "It had to be." "I'm so sorry," I began, but Diana interrupted gently. "Actually, we're not upset. We understand family attachments run deep. But yesterday she asked our contractor for a tour of the renovation work, claiming you'd asked her to send photos. It seemed off." I closed my eyes, embarrassment and anger washing over me in equal measure. "That would be my sister, and no, I didn't ask her to do that. I apologize for the intrusion." Diana's voice softened. "Family complications. Say no more. We just wanted to check before giving access to anyone." After thanking her for the call and apologizing again, I sat in my darkened office, staring at the Seattle skyline through the rain-streaked windows. What was Vanessa playing at the house? Was sold the money, deposited the case closed legally. Was this just another form of harassment? My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Forgot to mention she left this with our contractor. Said it belonged in the house. Attached was a photo of a small ornate silver key I didn't recognize. Puzzled, I forwarded the image to my mother with a brief explanation of Vanessa's house visits. Her response came quickly. "That's the key to Elaine's jewelry box. The rosewood one with mother of pearl inlay." I frowned at the screen. I had that jewelry box, it was packed with my things in storage. But I'd never seen this key before, had always assumed the tiny lock was purely decorative. I thanked my mother and promised to call the next day, then sat back, turning this new information over in my mind. The next morning I called the storage facility and arranged for access to my things. It was Saturday, so I spent the afternoon digging through carefully labeled boxes until I found what I was looking for. Grandma's jewelry box, wrapped in tissue paper and nestled between winter sweaters. The box itself was familiar. I'd admired it on Grandma's dresser throughout my childhood. What I hadn't noticed was the small keyhole, nearly invisible against the intricate wood grain. I had never tried to open the box, assuming the few pieces of jewelry Grandma owned were distributed among family after her death. The box itself was what I'd wanted to keep. With trembling fingers, I inserted the key Diana had photographed. It turned smoothly, and the lid opened with a gentle click. Inside was not jewelry, but papers yellowed with age, folded carefully and tied with a faded blue ribbon. On top lay an envelope addressed simply, "For Harper." I recognized Grandma's handwriting immediately, the elegant script she'd maintained into her 90s. With heart racing, I opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Harper, if you're reading this, it means you've found the key that opens more than just this box. I hope it hasn't taken too long though, knowing your sister, she may have complicated matters. Yes, I gave the key to Vanessa shortly before my passing. Not because I trusted her more, quite the opposite. I needed to know if she would do the right thing, if there was more to her than the ambition and self-interest I've observed over the years. The test was simple. I told her this key opened a safety deposit box containing amendments to my will. I said I'd written these amendments during a period when I was disappointed in you, and they specified that the house should be divided equally between you both. None of this was true, of course. There were no amendments. But I needed to see what she would do with this information. If she gave you the key immediately, it would show growth, a willingness to put family before self-interest. If she kept it hidden, using it as leverage or withholding it entirely, well, that would confirm what I already suspected. Beneath this letter, you'll find the true treasure journals kept by the women in our family for generations, including my own. Stories of strength, sacrifice, and occasionally spectacular failure. I've added my final entries, including my reasons for leaving the house to you alone. It was never about playing favorites, Harper. It was about recognizing who would honor not just the physical house, but the values it represents: integrity, compassion, and the courage to forge your own path even when it's difficult. Whatever you've chosen to do with the house, I trust it was the right decision for you. That's all I ever wanted, for you to make choices based on your own truth, not others' expectations. With all my love, Grandma Elaine. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma had seen everything clearly: Vanessa's manipulations, the family dynamics, the test that would ultimately reveal character. And Vanessa had failed that test spectacularly, holding on to the key until it no longer served her purposes. I spent the rest of the day reading through the family journals, discovering stories of great-grandmothers and distant aunts who had faced their own challenges and made their own difficult choices. When I finally closed the jewelry box as evening fell, I felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Grandma, but to a long line of women who had defined family by actions rather than blood. The next morning I called my parents and shared everything: Grandma's letter, the journals, the key that Vanessa had kept hidden until the house was beyond her reach. There was a long silence when I finished. I always wondered why Mom gave that key to Vanessa at the end, Dad finally said, his voice thick with emotion. It seemed so out of character. She was giving her a chance to do the right thing, Mom said softly. One last opportunity to show who she really was. The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. We talked about patterns established years ago, how Vanessa's manipulation had been enabled by everyone's desire to keep the peace, how my own reluctance to confront her directly had allowed resentments to fester. When we hung up, something had shifted. The truth, however painful, had cleared away decades of unspoken tensions. 2 days later, I received an email from Vanessa. The subject line read simply, "I know you found the letter." The message inside was brief: "Mom told me you opened the jewelry box. I suppose Grandma got what she wanted in the end, proof that I'm the selfish one, the failure. Congratulations on being the perfect granddaughter once again. I hope it was worth destroying our relationship." I stared at the screen, recognizing the familiar deflection and self-pity, the refusal to acknowledge her own choices. But for the first time I also saw something else: pain. Real pain beneath the defensive anger. For all her outward success, Vanessa had always measured herself against others, against me, against our parents' expectations, against some impossible standard of achievement. After careful consideration, I replied with equal brevity, "This was never a competition, Vanessa. Grandma loved us both. The house wasn't a prize for being perfect, it was a responsibility she entrusted to the person she believed would honor it properly. I've made my choice about the house just as you made yours about the key. We can't change the past, but we get to decide what happens next." I didn't expect a response, and for weeks none came. I immersed myself in work in exploring Seattle in weekly calls with my parents, and the occasional update from Diana about the house renovations. Life settled into a new pattern, one shaped by my choices rather than family expectations. As winter turned to spring, I made the decision to accept a permanent position with Evergreen Organics. The contract came with a significant salary increase and creative control that would have been unimaginable in my freelance days. I signed the papers on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, feeling a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. That evening, as I celebrated with takeout and wine in my small apartment, my phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen, watching Vanessa's name flash with each ring. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail to protect the peace I'd found. But another part, the part that remembered building sandcastles with my sister on childhood vacations, whispering secrets after bedtime, standing together at Grandma's funeral, made me answer. "Hello, Vanessa," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a pause, then you answered. She sounded surprised, almost vulnerable. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted, settling onto my sofa with my glass of wine. Through the window, Seattle's lights glimmered against the night sky, so different from the Rhode Island neighborhood where we'd grown up. "I got the job," she said abruptly. "In Boston. Senior marketing director for a healthcare startup. I start next month." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. "That's a big step up." "It is." Another pause. "I sold Mom and Dad's house for them. Got them more than asking price, handled all the paperwork. They're settled in Florida now." The information came in bullet points, facts without emotion, as if she were giving a business report, rather than discussing our family. Typical Vanessa, leading with achievements with tangible proof of her competence. "That was good of you," I acknowledged. "They mentioned how helpful you've been." "Did they also mention I've been seeing a therapist?" The question came out in a rush, almost defensive. I nearly dropped my wine glass. "No, they didn't. 3 months now. It was part of my severance package, executive coaching they called it, but the coach suggested more traditional therapy." She laughed, a short, self-conscious sound. "Turns out I have some issues with competitive behavior and validation seeking." Who knew, right? The attempt at self-deprecation was so unlike her that I found myself smiling despite everything. Shocking revelation. "Harper." Her voice grew serious. "I read Grandma's journals. All of them. Mom gave them to me after you told them about the key." I set down my wine, suddenly needing both hands free, as if physically bracing for whatever came next. And I was wrong. About a lot of things." The words seemed to cost her. Vanessa had never been one to admit mistakes easily. "The house, the will, the way I treated you, I convinced myself I deserved more because I was more successful, more practical. But the truth is, I was jealous. Jealous. Of what I couldn't keep." The incredulity from my voice. "You had the career, the status, everything you wanted." "No," she corrected softly. "I had everything I thought I should want. But you had what mattered to Grandma: authenticity. You built a life based on what you loved, not what would look impressive. And Grandma saw that." I was stunned into silence. Never in our adult lives had Vanessa spoken to me with such naked honesty. "The journals helped me understand her better," she continued, when I didn't respond. "Especially her final entries about us. She was worried about me, Harper. Not disappointed or angry, worried. About the pressure I put on myself, the way I measured everything by external success. I thought about the Vanessa I'd known, always striving, always comparing, never quite satisfied with her achievements. She saw more than we realized, I said. She did. Vanessa took an audible breath. I'm sorry about the key. I told myself I was keeping it as leverage, but the truth is, I was afraid of what I'd find. Afraid Grandma's final words would confirm what I already suspected, that she understood me too well. The admission hung between us more valuable than any apology she could have offered. For Vanessa to acknowledge her own fear, her own vulnerability, was unprecedented. Have you been to see the house? I asked, changing tack slightly. The real visit, I mean. Not the stalking, the new owner's version. She laughed, a genuine sound this time. I drove by last week. They've painted it this gorgeous shade of blue. Remember how Grandma always said it should be blue instead of white? I do. I smiled at the memory. She said white houses were for people without imagination. The gardens look amazing too. Better than when we had it, honestly. They've added a stone path and one of those little free libraries by the sidewalk. Diana sends me photos sometimes, I admitted. They host neighborhood gatherings just like Grandma used to. It's in good hands, Vanessa said quietly. You made the right choice. Those words, simple acknowledgement of my decision without resentment or challenge, felt like the closing of a circle that had been open for too long. How's your new place? I asked. Mom mentioned you found a condo downtown. It's perfect for me. Small but stylish, walking distance to everything. Very different from Grandma's house, but it feels like mine. You know, I looked around my Seattle apartment at the space I'd created that reflected my own tastes and needs rather than inherited expectations. I do know. We talked for nearly 2 hours that night, covering territory we hadn't explored in years. Her therapy insights, my new role at Evergreen, our parents' adjustment to retirement. When we finally said goodbye, something had shifted. The conversation wasn't a magical fix for decades of competition and miscommunication, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, we established a new kind of relationship. Weekly phone calls became routine. She visited Seattle in the summer, and I showed her my favorite spots in the city that had become my home. We spent Thanksgiving at our parents' Florida condo, the 4 of us cooking together in their small kitchen, creating new traditions to replace the ones we'd outgrown. A year after our reconciliation call, I returned to Rhode Island for Vanessa's birthday. We drove by Grandma's house together, admiring the gardens in full bloom, and the children playing on the porch swing we'd both loved as girls. They've made it even better, Vanessa observed, no trace of bitterness in her voice. Different, but better. I nodded, thinking how the same could be said of us, different than we once were, but better for the changes we'd embraced. Later, over dinner at her favorite restaurant, Vanessa handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a key, not Grandma's silver one, but a modern one, attached to a keychain featuring the Seattle skyline. It's to my condo, she explained. I thought you should have it for whenever you visit. No games, no tests, just family. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, thinking of Grandma's letter and the wisdom it contained. Family wasn't about inheritance or competition or even shared history. It was about choices made daily, about honesty and forgiveness and the courage to begin again. I'll use it often, I promised. And looking into my sister's eyes, clear now of the shadows that had clouded them for so long, I knew we both understood that some legacies are worth more than houses, more precious than any material inheritance. Grandma had given us the most valuable gift of all, the truth that set us free to find our own paths and eventually to find our way back to each other. Hey everyone! Wow, what a journey this story has been! I'd love to hear if you've experienced similar family revelations or healing in your own lives. Has a family conflict ever led to unexpected personal growth for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of family, karma, and justice resonated with you, Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Share this with someone who might need to hear that family relationships can heal with time and truth. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Your support means everything to me, and I hope the lessons from my family's story bring some wisdom to your own life journey. Until next time.